Hello, and thank you for watching the do0M. I'm Conroy Pitt, and I take a weekly look at some of the doomy things that threaten our collective existence. We look at the four horsemen of our collective apocalypse: war, disease, pestilence, famine, and the economy, and one that I like to think of as government. Is that five? Two of them are combined, it's four. For the last few weeks, I've been preoccupied by the occupation of Ottawa, which includes several of the horsemen: government, plague, and the economy. I'm not a dispassionate observer. I'm a resident of Ottawa, so that colors how I see this issue. I see it as an unlawful occupation of my city that needed to end. The residents of downtown Ottawa were terrorized for weeks by endless truck horns and unruly, aggressive people, and end it as with not so much a bang as a dance party, with the trucks driving off and most of the leaders quietly arrested or skipping town. The last handful of partiers, mostly drive-in supporters from around the region, danced and had fun downtown, mostly unmolested. It's been a very Canadian rebellion in that nobody seems to have been too seriously injured, and there was mostly peaceful, passive resistance. Police used overwhelming numbers and occasionally horses and pepper spray to herd the occupiers and retake the streets. The occupiers seemed surprised that police were actually using tactics to disperse them. This is something police do to BLM or Antifa, not them. This is a localized insurgency with national and international significance. Something to watch now is if this movement, if it is a movement, has legs beyond COVID mandates. Mandates are set to end. They're dropping in one jurisdiction after another, and certainly pressure by an unhappy segment of the population has helped push things in that direction. For sure, there were people of different races and ages and men and women involved, and any visit to the occupation site looked much like a Canada Day celebration. It did reflect the community largely. There were lots of different folks there. The people in this occupation were uncomfortably working class, but it went beyond truck drivers. Supporters included small business owners, people fired from their jobs for mandate reasons. The anti-vaccine community is not insignificant. They are probably between 15 and 30% if you go between hardcore anti-vax to just the merely suspicious. And this view extends across income and culture barriers. The anti-mandate community is bigger still. The vast majority of people hate mandates, and the percentage of people who think they're still required is probably slipping quickly into the minority. There have been a lot of people hurt badly by the mandates. People have lost livelihoods and family connections. Before the convoy started, I was having work and family conversations about the efficacy and practicality of certain mandates. And I was leaning towards being okay with them being lifted sooner rather than later. I think flag-waving community protests and trucker convoys would have been and were wildly popular at first. But then the medium became the message. Soon the talk wasn't about the mandates, but about the occupation itself. I believe most people who participated and partied at these events were not as such far-right activists or haters in general. I think it was largely a cross-section. This wasn't a Klan rally as much as the anti-fascists and probably some participants wanted it to be. The organizers were, however, openly calling for the overthrow of a sitting government. The occupation suggested that they would be willing to form a coalition with opposition parties and the involvement of the Governor General of Canada. The protest called for the end of vaccine mandates in Canada during the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Occupation Convoy spokesperson Ben Dichter stated on Fox News that we want to get rid of the vaccine mandates and the vaccine passports. And the passport is the really concerning one. Fair and valid points. As the convoy reached Ontario, it began to expand from its original goals. Several protesters voiced opposition to the perceived authoritarianism and corruption of Justin Trudeau. Some said this is not an anti-vax movement, this is a freedom movement. Jason LaFace, Canada Unity Ontario unity organizer for the convoy, said that the intent of the protest was to dissolve the government. Many of the restrictions that the protesters object to are provincial jurisdiction. The capital there is Toronto. One of the main organizers behind the convoy, Canada Unity, acknowledged that they had planned to submit their signed Memorandum of Understanding to the Senate of Canada and Governor General Mary Simon. Another occupation spokesperson proposed that a core group of organizers and their supporters could sit at a table with the Conservatives and the NDP and the Bloc as a coalition. So obviously this was a collection of different views, and it included a strong Christian subtext. If there was an official religion of this convoy, it was Christianity. There were many preachers and religious live streamers. If there were Jewish or Muslim or pagan supporters and live streamers, I'd be happy to see them. I just didn't see any. I detected a strong sovereign citizen theme, especially with the streamers. The independent sovereign person, I'm not sure if citizen is the correct word because that implies some sort of official involvement with your neighbors, but they believe themselves to be the final authority, other than God, of course, on practically every issue. And one could make the theological argument that when we speak about God, that when we speak about our interpretation of God, we're still really thinking about ourselves. Freedom means less government to many, or maybe no government. Or perhaps freedom is lawlessness, which is what we saw in Wellington Street over the last 3 weeks. There was no enforcement of law downtown by the Ottawa Police Service. Acts of violence and harassment were committed against the Ottawa community over the past 3 weeks. To my mind, they're advocates of anarchy who reject government authority in favor of self-governing or community consensus. And although it's become a synonym for chaos and the breakdown of civil order, it's certainly held its appeal to the dreamers and artisans and poets over the decades. Now the common man seems to have tweaked to it, and it suddenly seems like a more urgently dangerous and less cool idea. This whole event has brought out something in me that was somewhat dormant, which is civic pride in my immediate community, in my city. This felt like a threat to me and my neighbors, and we responded accordingly with counter-protests. Perhaps a city built out from your community is the political entity that deserves our most loyalty and attention. I feel much more like a proud Ottawa resident now. The Battle of Billings Bridge, where local residents in an ad hoc and more or less leaderless spontaneous action stopped a line of occupation reinforcements from entering the city. It will go down in local lore as the time when the city stood up to outside forces. And honestly, absent civic authority, local self-defense collectives probably would have evicted these occupiers after the first night. It is no coincidence that the Emergency Act was announced the next day. I guess it's an emergency when citizens start taking their safety into their own hands. The occupiers employ the symbols of nation, the flag, the anthem, also flags of separation and inverted flags, while at the same time seemingly rejecting the state. The medium is the message, and the occupation refused to move and became something to be reckoned with one way or the other. The Ottawa occupation, combined with international border crossings, caused the state to take action. The gambit perhaps was to force the government to take extreme measures, which the Emergency Act is, and make Justin Trudeau look like an overreaching dictator, a favorite trope of their narrative. And this all could have been avoided, of course, by a vigorous application of Ottawa bylaws and existing provincial and federal laws without letting the occupation put down its roots. The occupation was handed an unexpected gift with the authorities in action. The police, despite occupier stories to the contrary, have been remarkably gentle. The state could crush this, of course, which is why nonviolence really is the only practical tactic against the state. And these folks are doing that. Resistance isn't violence, and the fact that every participant is live streaming makes police violence less likely anyway. What I saw was traditional resistance by occupiers and appropriate response by authorities. I'm glad there wasn't more accelerationism. Even during this occupation, I expected a faction to take advantage to cause more chaos. And perhaps the attempt at arson was that attempt. This will elicit another sort of reaction from the city and other levels of government. After the commissions and inquiries, legislation will be put in place to prevent this from ever happening again, not to mention barriers. Protest is a right and often an obligation, but allowing vehicle convoys, big trucks, to wreak havoc on the economy and lives of millions was a miscalculation, I think, on the part of the occupiers. How they thought holding a city hostage and abusing it would help whatever cause they were advancing is beyond me. If they were truly an egalitarian movement that represented all Canadians, the city of Ottawa would have turned out in droves, by the hundreds of thousands instead of maybe just the thousands. Ottawa is a cosmopolitan and accepting and diverse city that embraces the freedom to exist in peace, real freedom. The occupiers' vision of truth seems to be something they can create for themselves rather than to be received from the much hated mainstream media. We're all citizen journalists now. Everyone here seemed to have a live streaming channel. The do0M is lame and old school with this vlog. The networks formed in Ottawa for the alternative media, if you call YouTube and Facebook streaming alternative, will have a profound effect on shaping attitudes. They already do. Some of the live streamers had 10, 15, 20,000 viewers at any one time. The armed militant cell at Coutts border crossing shows that there's some hardcore players on the nationalist side. Will this movement evaporate with the mandates, or is it the flowering of a populist movement like Trumpism in the USA, now connected by a web of relationships formed? This nationalist movement lacks a leader in this country, although you can see the Conservatives and People's Party of Canada politicians preening for their favor. Canada isn't used to this sort of robust political expression. This is not an insignificant expression of Christian nationalism in Canada. What I think confuses a lot of people is that Christian nationalism lacks the same racial component as in the United States. And seeing people of color complicates the anti-nationalist arguments. The symbols of the flag and the cross is the message. When people tell you who they are, believe them. So perhaps we're in for a season of whack-a-mole where this sort of politically motivated action will be more common tactic. Or perhaps people will be more anxious to get back to normal and forget all this once the mandates end in a couple of weeks. I personally think the latter. In other news, Vlad and Biden are still blah, 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 and there's still no war. Maybe soon, but I doubt it. So until next time, if there is a next time,